Greetings to you. My name is Tara Brabazon and I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to vlog 126, the short book. And this is part of our publishing series that emerged from that remarkable conversation I had with Philippa Grand from Emerald Publishing. So there are many things we're going to talk about today, but what emerged, I think, from that interview was the radical transformations to publishing in the last 2 to 5 years. And so we're going to track and follow those today. And one of those transformations is indeed the arrival of the short book. Now, these are a very important part and slice of academic publishing right now, also e-publishing, and it's part of what I think is a wider story about the transformations to work, to leisure, and indeed the commute, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But we're going to talk about this movement, yes, movement in publishing, but we're also going to talk about it in terms of the impact on you and your professional, academic and research career. How can you use what we're talking about today to transform your career? Because for academics, it gives us a great platform for very interesting research that is longer than an article, but indeed shorter than the conventional scholarly monograph of about 65 to about 75,000 words. And there are projects that are ideally suited to this in-between length. And there are many ways I could describe the small book, and we're going to talk about a lot of them today, but it's not simply a collection of articles, like 3 articles put together. It's a little bit more complicated than that, and so that's what we're going to talk about today. And the advice I'm going to take today comes from a rather remarkable design movement that particularly gained popularity before the Second World War. And that's why I'm sitting, by the way, in my yoga room. Because I need a little bit of space to play with some kit today. And so the advice that I'm going to give you today comes from the remarkable design movement called the Bauhaus. Remarkable. Bauhaus. How beautiful is this book, by the way? I love this book. So, Bauhaus. Now, the Bauhaus are known for many things, but one of them is their cliched design principle. Form follows function. I'll say that again because it will change your life. Form follows function. So for academics, this means that the content, the function of our research should determine the form, the shape of that research. So that means the content, the type of work that you're doing determines how it will appear in public. So some research is best produced through a 1,000-word journalism piece. Some research is best probed and explored through a podcast. Others may be a blog, but there also may be research that's best deployed via a refereed article or a long book or a short book. So you need to know the choices that are available to you so you can ensure your research finds its correct place and niche. Form follows function. So these small books really do matter to the conversation today. And remember, this is for all disciplines. So anyone that says that scientists don't write books, like Albert Einstein, talk to the head. But also there's a serious point to be made here that Springer Science is really the biggest publisher in the world right now. Pick an area of engineering, pick an area of science, and you will find not only a book series attached to Springer Science, but a small book series attached to Springer Science. And Leonard Cassuto, in the Chronicle of Higher Education in August 2013, described what he called, quote, the rise of the mini monograph. The rise of the mini monograph. That's an important phrase. So this movement is also described as short form publishing, with of course the long form being the conventional monograph, so about 65 to about 75,000 words in length. So as you can see, the very definition of the book is changing, and for 2 reasons: digitization and the rise, the popularity and now the stability of the e-book. The e-book is here to stay. So this mini monograph has particular characteristics that we're going to talk through. Most importantly, they have the refereeing or review process that we expect. It is academic work, so refereeing takes place. But it's a much faster refereeing process, and the reason being that referees are paid a little bit more to do the work quickly. So there is actually a method to this. So the work is refereed at quality, but at speed, because the referees get paid a little bit more. And there is, in classic form, 12 weeks from the point that the mini monograph is delivered through to when it is published. That is a 12-week publishing arc. Now, why this matters so much to you, yes you, is that topical research can remain topical. And how important is that if you're trying to work with policymakers? So this mode of publication is now possible because digitisation has rendered it economically viable. So a bookshop that would have absolutely no chance of promoting a small book, so where would they put it, how would they promote it, how would it be sold, none of those problems matter at all to Amazon and to Apple. And Joseph Espoto used that great phrase that, quote, shorts are native to digital media. So in other words, short books make a lot of sense if you're reading them on an iPad or you're reading them on a screen. So they're native to digital media, great phrase. And I think the Kindle and iBooks have rendered all sorts of new and innovative lengths of monograph possible. And we have to understand those lengths and ensure our research can match and work with those incredible, imaginative possibilities. Now, certainly short books have existed in the analogue era, and how it occurred is via a process, and I love this verb, can I say, chunking, because chunking was in place. So chunking takes a part of an already published book and configures it in a different form. So of course Penguin were and are the masters of this. So these tiny little books exist. So of course The Origin of Species, Charles Darwin, a tiny little chunk was taken on natural selection. And again, Hobsbawm's work on the French Revolution. Fantastic stuff. So George Orwell, Anthony Giddens and so forth are created and chunked out to create these very small little paperbacks. And can I say, they're fantastic to read whenever I'm going to the airport, whenever I think I have to wait for something, I'm waiting for someone to arrive. I always have a couple of these in my handbag, and they are really convenient to read. So this is chunking, the analogue chunking, taking a small part from an already existing published work and putting it in a different form. So there have been very many versions of that small book, and Penguin have tried just about all of them. And indeed, the Penguin Modern is the new phrase that's being used to describe this, and they call it, quote, a concentrated hit of an author's work. So a small, sharp, bang engagement with an author. Great. They've also produced, and this is very recent, a short e-book. And this short e-book costs £1.99. And it's the same price as a cup of coffee, and that's how they advertise it. So these digital reads will be the ones to watch. Penguin have configured this market as the commuter market. So someone wants to actually start and finish something in about 35 minutes, and so they've configured this short ebook to do that job. How fantastic is that? Now, this digital short form, I think, will be something to watch. It's being increasingly called, a bit of a complicated, unstable phrase, but the micro monograph. So this is something to watch. But where the micro monograph really matters is, firstly, for our guys and gals out there working with fiction. So suddenly, the short story has its own form, its own type of book. Form follows function. And for the non-fiction scholars out there, particularly in the social sciences, this offers incredible potential for pamphlets. So it almost feels like sort of being a 17th or 18th century pamphleteer. So digitisation has enabled the non-fiction pamphlet to suddenly gain a new form. Isn't this amazing? And I did want to dedicate this vlog today to one of our former PhD students, a wonderful woman, Dr. Michelle Jardon. She's finished her PhD. She's producing a full-length scholarly monograph from her PhD. She's nearly finished. Good on you, Michelle. But she's already done something incredibly clever. And let me tell you what she's done. She's already produced a short book for Springer on the research method that she deployed in her PhD. So photo voce or photo voice. The method in and of itself was so interesting that I suggested to Michelle, why don't you just cut that out and make that into a short Springer book? She did, and it's already been published less than a year from when she graduated in her PhD. So if you have a very interesting method, that's another strategy for you to consider. I know a lot of our students are really thinking through a publishing plan at the moment. Shani, our wonderful Shani from the Right Bunch, she's really, and we'll work on this together, trying to think about whether she does a single scholarly monograph from her PhD that she's about to submit, or whether we do 4 or 5 short monographs. So we've got all sorts of options to consider. We'll look at the entire thesis and work out what is the best way to present that material. Form follows function. So let's do this today. I'm going to be really practical, as I have been in all these publishing sessions. Yes, I'll talk about the why and so forth, but this is also a vlog about how you do it and what you do and where you put this stuff. So I'm going to tell you about the publishers that have committed to this in the short and the long term, and the ones that I recommend to you. So this trend is important. This is an important moment in academic dissemination. Now remember, there are going to be those shorter books between about 10,000 to maybe 20,000 words in length, the pamphlets and so forth. That's increasingly being called that micro monograph. There's not quite enough literature there for me to talk about that yet. There may be in a year's time, and we'll revisit that in a vlog. But there certainly is plenty of material now for the mini monograph. This is now a stable and mature publishing arc, and academic publishers have gone for it. So the length for this mini monograph is about 20, that's the small side, 20,000 words through to 50,000 words. Now different publishers are selecting their span between 20 and 50, and we're going to talk about that. So let's go through some examples of the short book. Isn't this fabulous? Isn't this exciting? And the sun's just come out, how glorious. So Palgrave Pivot was the first to do this. From 2012 is the earliest I've found this. So of course coming from Palgrave Macmillan. Now the Pivot went for between 30,000 and 50,000 words in length, and that is a great series. I can really recommend Palgrave Pivot, really strong. So that's one. Emerald Points. So from Emerald Publishing, Emerald Points, and I am about to have a book in this series. What makes Emerald interesting is they've really committed to the timely publication. So they advertise and they back it by saying 12 weeks. You deliver a book to us, 12 weeks later, that book is out. And as I said, they put their money where their mouth is. They pay referees more to deliver a quick and timely response. High quality, but faster because they're paying for it. Okay, Springer Briefs. Springer Briefs. I have 3 books in this series. I'm sure I'll publish more with them. I've found them absolutely fantastic. They have a deep commitment to all the disciplines, engineering, hard sciences, right the way through to the creative arts. Lots of sweet spots in the social sciences and in the health sciences. So this is terrific. Now they can focus on brilliant diversity, really interesting commitments, analytical techniques, contextual literature reviews they've published and published well, a hot topic, an in-depth engagement with a case study or a clinical example. How important is that to our health colleagues? And of course, I love these ones, the big concept. So if you're developing a really big, interesting concept, Springer Briefs is there. So they go for 20 to 50,000 words. I think the shortest I've read is about 24,000 words with Springer Briefs. Now, the university presses have also entered this market now that it is viable, and Stanford Briefs is a great example. They're running to the shorter end, so 20,000 to 40,000 words in length, and the publishing director and editor of Stanford University Press, Kate Weil, stated and confirmed that the same level of refereeing and vetting takes place. And certainly I can confirm that. In fact, often there are more referees that engage with it, and they engage with it in a really different and interesting way and improve the book enormously. So it's not like this is sort of dumbed down refereeing. Very high level refereeing and vetting takes place. It's a very interesting process. But Kate Weil argues that, quote, these are not brief books, but a different type of book, end of quote. And I love that. It's not like these are a cut down book. This is a different type of publishing. And I think that's why I find it so incredibly exciting. And she argues, and I agree with her, that what these short books are doing is they're more focused on making an argument or making a debate with an audience that may arch outside of academia, particularly into policy circles. So she argues, and again I agree with her, that this is an argument-driven style of writing. So it creates a new and flexible space to make a case in academic life. Right, so Oxford University Press have also entered this field, but more on the textbook side, with their very short introductions, and they call them pocket portables. So they do these introductions to topics, and that's more of the teaching side. If that's something you'd like to do, go for it. I've been very unimpressed, if I'm honest with you, with these very short guides. I haven't read a really good one yet. It's a bit too dumbed down for me. I mean, maybe they're aiming for the first year market, but to be honest with you, I've taught first years for probably 22 years, and I wouldn't assign any of them to my first years. They're too low. But again, you might write a better one. So Oxford University Press, these very short introductions. So these books are flexible in format, produced at speed, but also arch into the ebooks, therefore widening out the academic environment and the academic audience. So this is high quality content, and there are millions of people on earth today that want that high quality content that might never find it in a bookshop, but via Amazon and via ebooks, they can find your work. And also very sexy topics can be activated that don't have to be sustained over 70,000 words. So I'll give you an example of this. If you might have a really bespoke, interesting argument to make, but you know what, you haven't got enough to get it to 70,000 words. That's a real commitment. But you've got enough to get it to 30, and some really interesting titles are emerging. And I'm using just a couple, if I can, from Palgrave Pivot, ones that I bought last week that I'm going to try and read this coming week. The Digital Afterlives of Jane Austen. How brilliant is that? Can't wait to read it. I didn't even know that was a thing. It's a thing. I'm going to read it. The Digital Afterlives of Jane Austen. Fantastic. And another one I found last week, Managing the Experience of Hearing Loss in Britain, 1830 to 1930. Now, I didn't know that I needed to think about managing the experience of hearing loss in Britain between 1830 and 1930. But how interesting is that? So it's not understanding hearing loss or a history of deafness in the deaf community. It's understanding from the experience of the people that did it, using primary sources, what it felt like to have hearing impairment and hearing loss during that century. How fascinating is that? So again, great example of a short book, specialist audience, but I didn't even know I was interested in this. And I'm terribly interested in this now, and I can't wait to read it. So as you can see, what we're dealing with here are these pithy, short, edgy, really passionate types of books, new ways of thinking about academic writing. And I always remember there was an article in the New Yorker, I think, about, 2014, I think, by Joshua Rothman. And the title of that article was brilliant. Why is academic writing so academic? I thought that was brilliant. Now, why I love this is I never apologise for being an academic. I am proud to be an academic. We are one of the few occupations on this planet where we wake up in the morning and you know what, during the day, we're going to make a difference. Now, not many people can say that, so I will never apologise for being an academic. I'm proud to be an academic, and I'm incredibly proud of the research that we do. But being an academic doesn't mean that we can't write in different ways. We must continue to do our top-end, specialist, difficult research for our colleagues. That's incredibly important, the top shelf work we have to do. But we also should, Organic Intellectual 101, work on our prose to ensure we access those different audiences for our research. So I'm not talking about stopping doing academic writing. In fact, I'm saying the exact opposite to that. We have to do more of it and find new ways to express our ideas to find those new audiences. And that might include blogs or websites or podcasts or Twitter feeds, or indeed the short book. Now, I've written 4 of these short books, these mini monographs, and each of them had a different purpose. So if I tell you a little bit about the narrative of how I got there for each of those 4, that might provide some impetus or a model for you to think about, right, well, how could this project work for me? And just to provide a context around why I moved into these mini monographs, they all emerged when I entered leadership positions in a university. So when I became the head of a very, very large department, when I became the head of a school of teacher education, and indeed when I became the Dean of Graduate Research. Now, I still refuse to allow these leadership roles in universities to stop me being research active, okay? I'm not a hypocrite. And I didn't want to be one of those academic managers that stops being an academic when they become a manager. As I've often said, for me, academic manager is a compound noun. It's not an adjective and a noun. The academic bit is not an adjective. This is a compound noun. You do both. But in jobs like this, it is incredibly difficult because your research days, your research hours have ended. There's not 1 hour that is available in these jobs. You don't have research time at all in these jobs. It's not part of your contract. So that means if you're going to do research, it's done at 2 a.m. in the morning and it's done on weekends. So this means, of course, that big project, the 75,000 words, is pretty challenging to create at 2 a.m. and on Saturday afternoons. But it was interesting, at this time I started to develop these interesting, edgy topics that could be done in a shorter form. In fact, had to be done in a shorter form. The first of these was digital wine, how QR codes facilitate new markets for small wine industries. Who knew? So this did investigate the wonderful QR codes, big fan of QR codes, and I particularly want to look at, with my wonderful colleagues Bryn Gandy and also the late great Mick Winter, we looked at how QR codes, so tech, could be used to develop ultra premium and new wine industries. And we looked around the world, but obviously a lot of focus on Aotearoa, New Zealand as well. So can I say, you know, who knew? But I'm very interested in the relationship between technology, food and wine, and this book proved that. And the audience for this book became incredible. We thought just sort of premium winemakers in the new world might find it interesting. But it's been used around the world by marketers to talk about how QR codes can be deployed in all sorts of wine-related products. Who knew? And I always love digital wine. Great one. So again, fascinating book. Who knew? The next of these books, and by the way, I was head of department in Manchester and in the northwest of England when we were doing that work. So yeah, fantastic. So then we're moving to the next book, which was Enabling University. Terribly proud of this. So I wrote this book while I was a head of school of teacher education and I was a professor of education. So I wanted to make sure that universal design was part of what we do in higher education. Online, offline. And it came from rage, I'll be really honest with you. I was angry, frustrated and really, really cross that in a teacher education environment, ableism was so pervasive. And there was just a disrespect for men and women with impairments in teacher education. So I showed through curriculum, through universal design, how we can actually make a difference. So this was a really political book. It made a difference, it made an argument, and that phrase, enabling university, again, I still apply to this day. So my third attempt at these short books was unique urbanity, rethinking third-tier cities. Now, this one is the biggie. I got it right here. This has become my consultancy business card. This is my consultancy book. And what this book did was it claimed the space of small cities and large towns and showed how regeneration could take place, how depopulation could be managed. So unique urbanity. So to this day, including work I'm doing in the next week, to this day, whenever anyone has some need for someone to do work on small cities and large towns and manage regeneration, who are you going to call? So these small books really claim an interesting space. And the final short book has just been delivered to publishers, written with the wonderful Steve Redhead and Dr. Sunny Rushavara, one of our now graduated Flinders PhD students. And that book is, of course, Trump Studies. You've heard me mention it a few times. An intellectual guide to why citizens vote against their best interests. So this is a political book. It's also an incredibly high theory book. It doesn't pull back from any of that. And it comes from a singular place and a problem. And that was, why Trump? Why Brexit? Why are people voting against their own best interests? Why is that happening? And so that book answers that question. Now, this short timeline has made an incredible difference to Trump Studies. I delivered it in July. It'll be published in October. So you'll see me, those of you that work with me on different social media platforms, you'll see me working through how we disseminate that work between October and Christmas. So that's a great example of a short book making a clear argument and getting it out quickly for a political, social and intellectual intervention. So if you want to claim a specialist space, offer an argument on a contemporary issue, or present a coherent piece on a method, a theory or a trope, then the short book is really an option for you. And remember, I've talked about me being a head of school, head of department or a dean. Remember, you very shortly could be in a tough postdoc position or a teaching only position. Do not give up on your research. Do not do it. Recognize the diversity of publishing options. Form follows function. The diversity of publishing options that can continue your research career. Do not give up on me. Do not give up. No excuses. Find a way of doing publishing that fits into your current academic or professional role. Form follows function. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.